Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello and welcome to Your Family's Health. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. I am sure, like me, you have heard about mold and black mold and how we need to keep our areas like our garages and basements and other spaces dry to keep mold from developing. But why is it so hard and so bad for our health, and how can we avoid having it enter our homes and causing problems? My guest today is Michael Rubino, an innovative expert in mold contamination remediation. He is also the author of the book Mold Medic. Michael, welcome to Your Family's Health and the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Welcome.
Hey, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell us first about you and why your world is about mold and associated with mold.
What, everyone doesn't want to grow up and be a mold expert? It's really interesting because I've been around this industry, if you will, since I'm 5 years old. My dad's been a restoration contractor since then. And, I think for me, probably like most people, I didn't really pay much attention to mold or, never really had this thought cross my mind that our homes could be contributing to illness until after Hurricane Sandy, which wasn't, it feels like a long time ago, but also it wasn't that long ago. The real crazy part about this is when you have this mass flooding, like what happens with Sandy, people rush to get remediation done and to fix their homes. And I think that's what people really look at remediation as this thing that you do in an emergency case basis here. But unfortunately, everybody rushes through these types of things to get back into their home. And lo and behold, there was just tons of problems. For about 7 years thereafter, I'm still fixing problems inside people's homes that should have been fixed 7 years before. What was really interesting about that is I started to see a pattern of people not feeling well. And that's when I started doing a deep dive into, mold, bacteria, different things that can impact a home, especially when you have that type of catastrophic water event.
So how does mold even get into our living spaces?
Well, mold is part of our ecosystem. So essentially, you're always going to have what's called a mold spore pretty much everywhere. It's in the air outside. It's in the soil outside. It does track into our house. And now when we keep a good, clean house, we're naturally removing mold spores all the time. When it's so small, you don't even know because you can't see it. But what happens is once our homes start to have water problems, these spores that are just kind of like seeds, they attach themselves to the water and they start to grow into full-blown organisms. So it's really interesting kind of how that works. But once you understand that, it's very easy to mitigate having a mold problem in your home. What
is the difference between mold and mildew?
So unfortunately, folks, there is no difference. So mildew is mold, mold is mildew. The term mildew comes from what's called powdery mildew, which is a fungus disease of a plant. But when you actually look at the species of that fungus, it is from the Ascomycota kingdom. And what's really interesting about that is there's prominent molds that are in our environment that are also from the Ascomycota kingdom called aspergillus, which for those that don't know can cause aspergillosis. This is really interesting because it's typically a white powdery mold. So for a lot of us, we just think, that's just mildew and that's no big deal. But actually, it's just another species of mold.
So mold has been around thousands of years. Why now is it such a health-causing problem?
Well, there's many different reasons. One, because history tends to repeat itself. And by that, I mean, we forget things as time goes on and we focus on other problems that are in front of us and kind of lose sight of old problems. Well, actually, if you look in the Bible at the Old Testament, you will find Leviticus. And in Leviticus, there's actually a mold remediation protocol. I kid you not.
Really?
they had mold problems on these stone houses at the time. And essentially what they would do is they would clean off the mold. They would have the priest come and bless it. And then if it came back, they would actually tear the house down, carry the stones a mile away from the village so that it didn't contaminate the other homes. And when you look at that, it makes this whole thing more fascinating because truthfully, a lot of people think like, oh, it's just a problem today. It hasn't been a problem all these years, but yet it has. The other interesting thing is in the 1970s, and we had Richard Nixon as president, we started really facilitating more of an energy efficiency mindset. And so we started building tighter homes. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they're highly efficient. So we have cheaper energy bills, which is great. And it's better for the environment, which is great. However, when you have tighter homes, you have less air exchange from inside to outside. And so for people who are listening and thinking about this, when you're outside, you have an unlimited volume of air, right, that you're breathing. And so for every particle that you're breathing in outside, you have a lot of air also with it, which means that you're going to be taking in less particles per breath that you take. Now, when you have a more limited volume of air with less air exchange inside of our homes with the push of the energy efficiency, there's going to be more particles per breath, every breath that you take. And really what's happening is, from a science perspective, your body is then having to fight to remove these particles from your system. And so once you have this abundance of particles, toxins, chemicals, etc., it kind of creates this perfect storm where you start to not feel well. It's overwhelming your immune system.
What is the difference between black mold and other kinds of mold?
So mold can either be pathogenic, allergenic, or toxigenic. And so when people say black mold, they're talking about typically Stachybotrys, which is one of the, media frenzied toxic black mold. But really, I mean, it's interesting. It's toxigenic. So yes, it is toxic. There are other toxigenic molds like Atomium. Tends to be, in the gray and black band of colors. But what's really interesting and what I want people to realize is that even if you have a non-toxigenic mold like Aspergillus, which happens to be an allergenic mold species, certain species of Aspergillus can still produce mycotoxins, which are toxins of the fungus, which are toxic because they're toxins, right? So from that perspective, we want to look at mold a little differently. We want to make sure it's under control. It's not growing and spreading across our home. And we always want to keep that mindset. If we want to have a healthy home, which we should, I think we understand air quality is probably more important than we might have ever understood in years past. We want to really reduce the amount of particles per breath that we're breathing. And considering water damage is one of the biggest problems that affect air quality inside of our homes, and mold is one of the quickest things that develops from water problems inside of our homes, it's a really good measure to understand, if I have a mold problem, I might have bacteria, I might have other things happening as well. And so I better do something about that.
So can I always see mold? Is this something that is always visible to me?
Unfortunately not, which makes it a little more difficult. However, just to put in perspective for people, 250,000 spores can fit on the head of a pin. So it is about 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can see. So when you see it, there's already a lot there. The other thing is, depending on the path that water travels, that would be required for mold to grow. If it travels behind a wall, you might not see it unless you saw some sort of sign that wall was wet. I actually was just at a house. The wall looked amazing. You couldn't tell there was a problem. But the second you open that wall up, the wall behind it, because our construction surfaces have layers in between things, the wall behind it was completely rotted and falling apart. And so it can be tricky. I think one of the best ways to tell if you have, mold or bacteria in your home is going to sound really strange, but instead of testing your air, you test your dust.
And how do you test your dust? Can I do that myself?
Oh yeah, I mean, you can go and get a dust test right now yourself. It ships to your house, kind of like the 23andMe of your home, if you will. And you can collect dust from your home, and it'll be analyzed by a laboratory. The technology is PCR technology, which I think we've all come way too used to at this point. But it analyzes the DNA of what's in your dust, and the best way to do that is through PCR technology. And when you do that, you're looking for abnormalities. It's like a way to screen your home to see, just like when you go to a doctor and you're like, I'm not feeling well. Well, they screen you before they start to see what abnormalities they may want to test further in.
So if I'm doing this test for the dust, would I do this in every room, or am I just focusing on the basement or those areas that are moist?
You can do it a couple different ways. Obviously a test costs money, right? So we want to be conscious of cost. If you are just looking to answer the question, does my home, might my home have a problem? You can buy one test and collect dust from various parts of your home. It's called a composite test. So you're essentially kind of averaging out what's in your home to look for any abnormalities. It doesn't tell you where it's located, just if you have a problem. But then, of course, if you want to get more granular, you can get one test per room, or, if you just want to check your basement, you can get one test for the basement, et cetera, et cetera. And that will give you a little bit more locational information.
So if I have mold behind the wall and that wall is closed off, how is it affecting me?
Great question. Well, most people have baseboards or crown molding or what have you. There is a gap, and it's a small gap. But actually, when you look at mold being 25 to 50 times smaller than the eye can see, that means, if we were to zoom 25 to 50 times larger, that little crack or crevice that we have pretty much scattered throughout our house is going to be like a gaping hole for something as small as mold or bacteria or viruses, right? So when we look at it from that perspective, we understand that, a little bit of drywall is not stopping something so tiny from getting from behind the wall to in front of the wall.
So with this being exposed, maybe you mentioned, what storm was that?
Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, Sandy. So I guess your business really ricocheted because of the damage from the moisture. Is that right? Did you have more incidences of mold after that Superstorm Sandy?
Absolutely. But for me, what was the most fascinating part about all this, it wasn't just, the expected, calls that you would get after a hurricane like that. It was for so many years after that, we're still like remediating and fixing homes that weren't remediated properly or weren't fixed properly. And I think, that really opened my eye to the fact that, there's a lot more to this scientifically than the construction industry typically looks at. And so, as I kind of went down that rabbit hole and learned more about the microbiological contaminants, and especially looking at it from a health perspective, I realized that, wow, we need to be a lot more thorough in this field. And that's kind of what came out of the book, The Mold Medic, An Expert's Guide on Mold Removal. It was really writing a book that anybody could understand to really, really know both the science aspect and the construction aspect so that they can put those pieces together and create a healthy environment.
How dramatic can this really be? When there's a mold problem, do you actually tear the wall down? Do you destroy the entire house? I mean, how extensive can this be?
Well, anything in life can be as dramatic or as extensive as you'd like it to be. I would say that, you typically do want to tear down a wall if you have mold growing in the wall, because you have to figure out what's the cause of that growth. I mean, if you don't, let's say the window's leaking, if you don't open up the wall, fix the window leak and remove everything properly, it's likely to keep coming back, right? Because there's always a cause and origin where this stuff starts to grow to. There has to first be an opportunity for it to grow before it becomes a problem. From there, it's actually not as dramatic as one would think. Mold being an organism, it's constantly reproducing, and about those spores that we talked about earlier. And what we want to do is, after we figure out the problems inside of our home and we address them and fix them, then it's really cleaning to remove all these particles and toxins that have now settled in our environment. Because if you've ever sat on a couch on a sunny day and you were near a window and you saw that ray of light peek through, and that's usually the first time that we all connect with, like, holy cow, there is so many particles in our air that we're breathing in all the time. Once you realize that and you see that there's all these tiny particles that are circulating around our house and getting inside of our body, well, then the answer is that we have to remove as many of these particles that could have things like mold, bacteria, viruses, et cetera. And that's how we'll make the difference in our health.
Is there anything that I can use to decrease my numbers of mold spores anything over the counter that I can purchase without having to use your services, although I would love to use your services.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite products for cleaning up, just the environment. I usually go with like organic or botanical broad spectrum disinfectants. Mm-hmm. Broad spectrum means it, kills and disinfects and removes the broad spectrum of things. One such product is a product called like Benefact. You can pretty much get that on Amazon, shipped to your door in 2 days.
Could you spell that?
Benefact, Benefect. No chemicals, and I love that. For those that love that type of thing too, it's a great product. It's affordable. That's amazing. Also, I want to bring people's attention to other strategies such as cleaning with something like that would be HVAC filtration. A lot of us, when we don't change the filter often, we're human beings. It's okay. We can forgive ourselves, but it's time to face that reality. We also don't educate ourselves on what makes the filter any better than the next filter. And so we tend to buy the cheaper filter because we don't see the value. Well, let me tell you why there's value in getting the more expensive filter. Hopefully for some of you, this sparks some interest, because the better the filter, and the filter is how you actually quantify if it's better or not, is it's going to have what's called a MERV rating. So the higher the rating, the smaller the particle it will remove. Now, why does that matter at all? Because it's the really small particles that typically make the most impact on our health. And this is according to the American Lung Association, and the EPA, even the FDA talks about this. You really want to understand that anything smaller than 10 microns has an ability to bypass our self-defense mechanisms, like our mucous membranes and everything of that nature, and get deeply embedded into our bronchial systems, bypassing a lot of the self-defense mechanisms that our lungs have, before finally entering our bloodstream, where it can impact our organs. So this is really how we get sick from viruses and bacteria and all these other microorganisms. So it's really important that if we can remove a smaller particle from recirculating around our home through the HVAC, that $12 filter, it could be a very smart investment. The other thing is air purification systems. I think air purification systems, again, if they can remove as small of a particle as possible, keeping that particle load down, that's going to make an impact to every breath that we take, which is roughly 7.5 million per year, by the way.
Do you recommend a specific air purifier?
I do. There's a few of them that are really great. Molecule, Air Doctor, IntelliPure. Those are the three that come to mind. All three of them have proven themselves to remove as small of a particle as possible with current standards of technology.
So once I have the air purifier in my environment, do I still need the mold removed?
Well, it depends, right? Because if you have to look at it from this standpoint of, is that organism, and it's with mold, it's a colony of organisms that colonize together. Is that colony of organisms producing more particles than I can remove by cleaning and air purification, et cetera? Because if we have a good dilution of particle to air, we're okay. But when we have too much particle to air, that's when it really starts to become a problem. We also have to take into consideration the type of mold, right? So if it's one of the toxic molds, that may be something that we may want to, take a little more serious, just due to some of the, effects that they're known to cause. And I think that it really just depends on what your budgetary constraints are and what your goals are, and I think you have to put all that together. I'd say when I'm dealing with clients, no project is ever exactly alike. No person is ever exactly alike. And so it becomes a very intimate process of what are your goals and how do we reach them?
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook Garard, and today you're learning about mold and how it affects our health from Michael Rubino, an innovative expert in mold contamination and remediation. He's also author of the book, Mold Medic. So tell me a little bit about your book. What is the focus and what do you want the listeners to know about it?
Well, I think the cool thing about the book is it doesn't just dive right into these scientific facts. The first thing you read about is kind of a story of what really happened to me that made me decide that it was time for me to write a book and get that information out to the public. And it was really just because there was so much archaic information out there from industry standards from the 90s. And here we are. And at the time when I wrote that, it was 2020. So you're looking at a 30-year difference of technological advancements that really haven't been touched on. I also saw just a pattern of people going down different paths, trying to create healthy environments, but kind of swinging out on that. And mainly it's because of, again, bad advice based upon more archaic approaches and technology. And so it was really time to try to update people. Believe it or not, it's really one of the only books on the subject of mold removal. There's tons of books on how mold affects the body, but not really about what to do about having mold in your home. So it was just a really cool experience to be able to take, 10 years of my life experience at the time, to put that together into a book format to give people good information on how to take care of a problem inside their home that can be a big problem for their health too.
So how can I control the moisture in my environment to prevent mold from forming in the first place?
Okay, probably four main tips here. So we have in subgrade spaces, we have always something called vapor diffusion that happens. And that's essentially it rains, water sitting against the foundation, and the principle of water is it has to dry to the drier side. And the drier side is going to be in your basement, in your crawl space, etc. So having something like waterproofing strategies and a dehumidification system inside your basement or crawl space that is constantly removing the moisture as it comes into the environment, that's going to be successful. Mold needs at least 60% relative humidity to grow. So if we stop the humidity 50% or below, we're going to be in good shape. Obviously, roof is another probably big red flag that people typically look at. Roof leaks can be pretty disastrous, especially that water travels and it's going to travel downwards. So I think just checking up on your roof every year is going to be key. I think because a lot of people kind of don't check their roof until there is a problem. Doors and windows, another one of those things where they all have seals and waterproofing and weatherproofing, and those do break down over time. And so having somebody qualified to check those once a year is probably not a bad idea. The other pretty big culprit that I see often is grading. So grading is kind of like the slope of our landscaping around our house. So if we're sitting at the bottom of a hill, right, and it rains, water is coming forcefully down that hill right towards our house. And over time, it's just going to weather and erode our framing and get inside of our house. And this is where you'll start to have problems around exterior walls, even through the floors, and they can be very costly. So really spending the time to organize the landscaping around the house so that it slopes away from the house is going to be so key. If you live in a climate like Florida, or a tropical area, you might want to not just have dehumidifiers in the basement, but you may want to have a whole house dehumidifier. Again, keeping that moisture below 60%. Kitchens and bathrooms, they leak, things happen. There's nothing you can do about that. But when it does happen, just know that mold can grow in as quickly as 24 to 48 hours. So acting fast to dry the place out is what's going to be key.
So if I find mold, what is the first thing I do? I call you, or what do I do?
Well, that would be nice, but I don't know that everyone can call me. The first thing that you really need to do is, I would say, contact a plumber if it's a plumbing leak, because you want to stop the water as soon as possible before it just gets worse. Having a plumber come in and shut it off, if most likely it's a covered loss, call your insurance company, notify them. A lot of us don't know this, but we have that legal responsibility to notify them right away if we want coverage. So you're going to let them know. They might advise you on some things to do too. And then you're looking for a reputable company that's going to, safely and responsibly restore the place. And I think that's really key. Is a lot of people think that they have to go with whatever their insurance company recommends. You're welcome to, of course, but you're also welcome to select someone that you like, that you feel is going to do a great job. And so I would always try to recommend people, make sure you're hiring somebody who really understands the science behind what they're doing. Because if they're like, talking about just ripping out some drywall and it's all going to be fine, that's where things can be problematic because, again, these things spread through the air. And so if we're not protecting ourselves, then they will spread through the air and then no one will be there to clean it up.
So when you go in to remove mold, are you wearing a hazmat suit or a mask? What are you wearing when you go in to remove all of this mold?
Yes, so we do wear hazmat suits. Our company is a little over the top. We typically wear PAPRs, which is like those hooded things that you see in the movies when there's like virus contamination. But you really want to wear a Tyvek suit. You want to wear an N95 mask that is going to stop mold and other particles from entering as you're taking breaths. You'll want to kind of throw those suits away as you move from room to room because you're trying to eliminate the cross-contamination aspect. It's kind of like when you do lead or asbestos removal that I think people have seen or are pretty familiar with, where you really have to take care in making sure that you're controlling the airflow and keeping all of that stuff where you want it to be and not from dispersing across the building, house, etc.
What kinds of health problems are you susceptible to when you're breathing in mold?
Well, I would say it's a very wide range. Some of the more common problems you hear about are brain fog, chronic fatigue. We mentioned aspergillosis earlier, so respiratory infection, respiratory disease. We see a lot of similarities between like Lyme disease symptoms. We see some interesting things when people have certain autoimmune issues or diseases, how they become a lot more susceptible to mold and seem to have a heightened sensitivity to mold. Weight gain, weight loss, both sides of that spectrum. Rheumatoid arthritis has been an interesting thing that's come out. Dr. Jack Wolfson, a cardiologist, is talking about how it affects the heart. Dr. Dale Bredesen is doing studies on how mold can cause early onset of dementia, the early onset of Alzheimer's or inhalational Alzheimer's. I would say it's very much an evolving study on all the different ways that it can impact us. And of course, it's an ever challenging study because every single person is inherently different. But I think some of the other things are SEERS that just came to mind, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, gut inflammation, gut health issues, SIBO, things of that. I mean, it just goes in so many directions.
If someone wanted to find out more about you, where can we find it?
I think the best place to go would be to homecleanse.com. I'm somewhere on that homepage.
Well, thank you for being here, Michael Rubino, an innovative expert in mold contamination and remediation. He's also the author of the book Mold Medic. We hope you stay safe and continue to stay healthy, and thank you for sharing this very important information with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Dr. Jeanine Cook Garard from the Nursing Department here at Nassau Community College, and we want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the Nursing Department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.